How did we get this? A map so detailed, so precise. This is a place that has lured explorers from all over, killing many of them. That's because the bottom of the Earth is a place that humans really shouldn't go. It's a place that, in fact, they couldn't go. Our species were able to move and settle across the whole globe, from desolate ice deserts to impossibly faraway islands. But even after we had reached every corner of the globe thousands of years ago, there was still one landmass that no human had ever laid their eyes on. But something had to exist down here, they thought, so explorers and mapmakers continued to search. And on these maps, they drew their imaginary ideas. A giant continent somewhere down here. Or maybe this island out in the east really extended down, like way down. Others mocked the idea of a southern world. They depicted it as a dystopian land full of kingdoms rife with immorality. But these were all guesses. By the end of the 1700s, explorers had turned most of the world's oceans from mysteries to fact. And it was only then that the vast ocean expanses of the South turned from imaginary musings into the next frontier of discovery. The newly enlightened mapmakers were now drawing precise gridded lines to accurately audit the planet. They were done with their pretend predictions, their monsters in place of knowledge. The map would remain empty until they had evidence to fill in those great blank spaces. Hopefully with Earth's lost and last continent, for thousands of years conjectured by many, but seen by none. So expeditions were launched moving south, and they failed. The southern seas were simply too vast, the gaps in our knowledge too big to take on this uncharted place. But in 1772, one captain would begin to change everything. He set sail with 2 ships and 192 men. And with him, the latest technology, a new clock, the most precise clock ever made at the time, and would for the first time allow him to determine his longitude, to map his every move, to give us the lines that we can now show you on this map. This journey was funded by the all-consuming greed of an expanding empire looking for new soil to exploit. But him personally, he had big things going on in his mind. He was in it for the desire to go south, further south than any man had ever gone, and as far south as any man could possibly go. He wanted to be the one to find the lost continent at the bottom of our planet. So for 3 years he scoured the oceans, yet searching in the temperate latitudes, all he found was water. So he decided to cross a line that no one before him had crossed, the Antarctic Circle. In case it's not clear, we're now looking at the bottom of the world, and this map is actually a story. It's a story of a doggedly determined explorer spending years of his life circling these oceans, dipping more south than any human had ever traveled, then coming up, and then dipping down again, just in case this time he might find something. But all he found was frozen water, floating ice sharp and perilous. But he kept on, looking for ways in. On a couple of occasions he reached within breathing distance of land, but he never caught sight of it. After years of searching, it was finally time to head home. He didn't find the continent. But what he did do was prove that if this fabled land existed, it would not be the bountiful paradise that people had imagined and hoped for. He had scoured nearly every inch of those latitudes. Instead, he knew that any land down here would be a desolate world, quote, forever buried in snow and ice. So more explorers go and attempt to do what Captain Cook couldn't. And 45 years later, they find something. It was the lost continent, and humans were laying eyes on it for the first time. No, it was not temperate, but barren and merciless, but it was seen. It existed. For human beings, a moment like this doesn't mean the end of a goal. It actually just means the very beginning. So they don't stop here. Soon more ships are heading south, explorers looking to claim land for their country, seal hunters, whale hunters looking for new untouched waters, scientists on boats with measuring tools and open minds, recording everything. The unknown place, a little more known, sketched on paper, the shape of a landmass. But these records only served as a new measurement of our ignorance, how much we didn't know. Our discoveries were still scattered and partial. To truly unveil Antarctica's mysteries, we needed to venture inside it. A few years would need to pass before the people with power would turn their attention slightly away from mapping and conquering the non-icy world to supporting the full exploration of this desolate place. But eventually they got on board. They needed to know what existed in the last blank land on the map. By then, they had unleashed the magic of mechanical power. This new power allowed them to navigate the once impossible ice. On board these boats were scientists, explorers, ready to ask and answer new questions. Soon it's 1911, and there's a race to see who can get to the South Pole first. And it's the Norwegian group who does. The British team gets there second, and everyone dies on their way back. And the map is shaping up. New goals come to replace old ones. We now need to cross Antarctica through the pole, going through the ominous unexplored region on the map. A guy named Shackleton tried this, but didn't make it very far. But his journey became a tale of courage and the will to live, when he and his crew, against all odds, in some of the most hostile circumstances, managed to all return home. The expeditions of that period reset the standards of human limits. And bit by bit, line by line, the void on the map was gradually getting filled in. By 1920, you're seeing maps like this, a red shading on the parts that we know, and yet still so much left unknown. After millennia of dreaming of it, we finally and indisputably conquered the skies. The first airplane flew over the South Pole in 1928, and in the next decade, many more would follow, each flight providing more detail to add to the compendium of hard-fought observations. But as much as it is a part of our nature to explore and learn, it is also a part of our nature to conquer and dominate. In the aftermath of the most catastrophic war humanity had ever known, humans once again revealed their little eternal paradox, that their love for exploration was often as much about conquest and control as it was about learning and understanding. Petty fights about who owned this land came to the surface. And thus, on the maps, more and more we see these shades of colors that indicate who owns what. Scientific research stations dot the icy surface, flying national flags, established as much for asserting territorial control as for science. And now it's a new world, where the two superpowers had turned the map into their chessboard for influence. Both were now looking for a share of what was still Earth's largest unexplored territory. And soon the United States is making maps like this, that has a whole shade color dedicated to land that has been seen exclusively by American eyes. It's a map that says we were here first. But then the countries get together and they make an agreement that Antarctica was not meant to be just a new field for our conflicts, but rather a place for scientific inquiry. So scientists keep coming, enabled by better technology. But despite all the progress, this continent remains unknown and potentially unknowable. That's until humans break a seemingly impossible barrier by escaping the force of gravity that kept us bound to our home planet. We're now throwing up spherical machines with cameras on them into space. Countries use these satellites to snap photos of their enemies. We also just have photos of the Earth, seeing it like never before. Our maps were no longer educated guesses. They were snapshots of reality. Thanks to our satellites hurling around our planet once every 100 or so minutes, humans have outdone themselves now. We have more data than our human brains could possibly comprehend. It's too much. It's basically worthless due to its scale, its detail, its complexity, until new electronic brains appear, allowing us to collect and synthesize hundreds of thousands of images from space, blending them into one map. A map that explorers who broke into this desolate place 100 years earlier could have never imagined. Every nook and cranny of Antarctica is seen. But we don't stop there. Now let's measure the radiation emitted from the icy surface. We can measure the chemistry of the atmosphere down here, the temperature of its oceans, the velocity of its ice sheets as they move. We can somehow even map what this place would look like if you removed all the ice. Scientists soon declare that Antarctica, the place that was always inaccessible to humans, is now the best mapped continent on Earth. This generations-long quest to map Antarctica is ultimately a story of struggle and then triumph. Regardless of the cost, and despite the lack of any rational reason to do so, always driven by these twin motives of curiosity and conquest, always willing to do whatever it takes to step foot in a place no matter how impossible it seems. But you know we're not going to stop here. As new frontiers reveal their mysteries to us, the same story is bound to unfold. And I can say with certainty that we will continue to do this, not because we need to for survival, but because we need to for some other reason, some deeply human impulse that pushes us way past what's reasonable to discover the truths of our world and our universe.